We're going to talk about infantilization. I want you to imagine that you're more than capable of cleaning your own room. Every day, whether it's your partner or your parent, someone else cleans your room before you do. And they come from the side of, I'm doing something nice for you. But to you, it's just annoying. And you've brought it up. Hey, I'm going to clean it. Don't worry about it. They do it anyway. Hey, stop cleaning it. They don't stop. This goes into many different things, from cleaning to general chores to growing up and wanting to do things on your own. An example that you're going to see in the video is an 8-year-old who wants to bathe themselves. Their dad is like, no, you're not ready, and chooses to punish them for wanting to be someone who's growing into being a person. If it sounds like you've been on either side of that, that sucks. If you're the person who's been infantilized, I'm sorry. I feel that if we are to achieve maturity as individuals and as a species, we need to recognize and address the systems that infantilize us.
There are lots of positives to being a child. One of those positives underpins the TheraminTrees channel icon. The image of the floating fetus in adult clothes, originally a tuxedo, came from a dream in my teens. For me, what came through in that image was the idea of preserving the fresh, unjaded eyes we possess at birth. For a brief time, our curiosity about the world is uncluttered by dogma and tribalism. Our minds haven't yet been colonized by any partisan prejudices from the communities into which we're randomly born. We don't see the bogus social divisions constructed by certain groups and attributed with spurious meaning. When their assertions don't make sense, we question them unselfconsciously. When the answers are inadequate, we say so without inhibition. This kind of sincere reality testing offers us the most solid foundation for acquiring skills, knowledge, and understanding. Not solid in terms of rigidity and inflexibility. As a species, we seem repeatedly to learn and forget, relearn and re-forget. That fixed dogmatic mindsets lead us down disastrous pathways. Solid in terms of resourcefulness. Instead of clinging to a bogus idea, so that when it sinks, we sink with it, we're able to adapt, to recognize its bogus nature, and step away into new insight. The childlike instinct to question freely is a precious strength worth preserving. But instead of nurturing this and other strengths, many individuals and groups try to preserve the child's vulnerabilities to meet various psychological needs of their own. The child might be seen as a blank canvas to be filled with all the unexamined tribal superstitions and traditions of previous generations and charged with passing them on wholesale to the next. The child might be groomed as an enabler, trained to affirm and support the comforting illusions of egotists. The child might be idealized by individuals and groups who venerate innocence and view worldly knowledge and experience as contaminants to what they see as a perfect untouched state. The child gets depersonalized into a slave, a pet, a toy, an ornament. Instead of being encouraged and celebrated, the child's development is actively sabotaged in an attempt to preserve the most vulnerable qualities of infanthood: ignorance, inexperience, incompetence, dependence. The growing individual becomes infantilized.
When we talk about infantilization, in the other things that we've talked about, we talk about how sometimes parents will clean for you, cook for you, do things for you when you have asked them not to a point where it stunts your growth, either because now you are so accustomed to not doing those things yourself, or because you just never figured out how to. There's a big difference in doing your child's laundry as a favor and because they've asked you to, than it is to just like do your kid's laundry their entire life. And when they're like reaching adulthood, they go, hey, maybe I should learn how to do laundry. And then you go, no, I've always done it for you. I'll keep doing it for you. And when they move out on their own, they don't know how to. Same thing with cleaning, same thing with just generally treating them like they are incapable of doing the basic things they need to do to exist as a person, whether or not that you mean to. One of the points that they just brought up was also like not allowing them to seek information, which is a good segue into conservative parents wanting to maintain control by banning books or anything that may allow your child to question the things that you say and do.
Infantilization is an extremely common manipulation.
It is extremely common, and it is not always done on purpose. That doesn't change whether or not it's done. There have been plenty of people in my comments who are like, my husband doesn't know that he does this. My parents don't know that they do this. I had no idea that I was doing this. It happens, and that's the issue with a lot of these problems, is that sometimes we really do them without knowing. Like this, like love bombing, it could just be part of who you are. You could really enjoy acts of service. You could really enjoy cleaning for someone, and then you don't think too hard about whether or not they want you to. And at some point, if you keep doing it for someone who has asked you not to, they may stop asking you, and you take that as a green light. It's not. They just know you're not going to change.
In which individuals are treated in ways that deny their maturity or mental capacity. It's also one of the most slippery forms of manipulation. Unlike more overtly abusive tactics, it's often disguised as other things, like affection. Infantilizing abusers claim their babying behavior is an expression of love. But it's not love. It's a cage that gets progressively more confining. As their world shrinks, targets of infantilization feel increasingly immobilized. They anticipate failing and not being able to cope. I want to explore this manipulative tactic and some of its insidious features. I'll be using real-life examples, mainly from families and religion, but it can happen wherever power dynamics exist.
A really easy way to look at this is imagine a parent who always cooks for their child, right? It's a nice thing to do. You're always feeding them. But then as part of their punishment for something, or in retaliation of a conversation you're having, you go, I cook for you, I clean for you, I can't believe you're talking to me this way. If the things that you do for other people are then going to be levied into some sort of like, don't talk to me this way, I do this for you, so you technically owe me, that's an issue. You should, you should force yourself to do things in a relationship that are one-sided. You should force yourself to do whatever it is that you do, whether it's cooking, cleaning, whatever it is, without any sort of reciprocity needed. The conversation we're having is not one partner does all the work, one doesn't. That's an entirely different issue. That's one person neglecting the relationship. But you shouldn't be like, oh, I cook for you, I clean for you, you owe me. That's all that is. Just don't do those things. If you stop cooking for your adult child, are they going to starve? Debbie, this is about Colt again.
Abusive one-to-one relationships, politics, education, the workplace. And I invite you to notice any personal parallels in your own experience.
She sounds like that voice in your head that tells you you can't do anything.
Our first experience of one-up, one-down relationships are the ones we're born into. We enter the world powerless, into the care of people who hold all the power, people we call family. For that first vulnerable part of our lives, they govern every aspect of our existence, from our appearance, to the food we eat, to the company we keep. Fathers and mothers are kings and queens, exercising all-encompassing sovereignty. Older siblings, next in line to the throne, also hold significant influence. In healthy families, this monarchy is benevolent and fleeting. Parents recognize they're the temporary guardians of their offspring, not their owners or their eternal rulers. Their absolute power doesn't corrupt absolutely. It's channeled positively into helping the child develop into a self-sufficient, independent individual. And as the child acquires knowledge and experience, the one-up, one-down relationship resolves into an equal adult relationship.
Yeah, that's an easy way to say that, like, you're their parent until you hopefully transition to being their friend, or at the very least, like an acquaintance. If you treat your child like they're a baby for their entire life, that's not going to happen.
Parents remain parents in name, and bonds of love and affection continue, but the functional role of parenting ceases. All parties are self-directing now, free of any role-based remnants. When you come from a positive family environment like that, it's sometimes hard to conceive of the countless families where parents become perpetual dictators, lazy with power, where roles are malignantly distorted to satisfy unmet needs and fantasies, and act out unresolved issues.
That is just Diane and Dawn and all these people who are like, my children are meant to grow up and satisfy me in some way. They're meant to just provide for me what I was not able to get out of my other relationships. It happened with Debbie and Colt. I brought them up a lot, but it's such an easy example of 90 Day Fiance where Debbie's husband died and Colt was just kind of used to keep her going, and then it just gets gross. And now Colt replaces Debbie with any woman that wants to have sex with him and is willing to cook and clean for him. Because Debbie does literally everything except sleep with the man.
Adultification happens when the child is prematurely assigned adult roles and responsibilities they're not ready for. Spousification puts the child in a quasi-partner role.
That is exactly what that is.
Spousification puts the child in a quasi-partner role, opening the door to emotional, if not physical, incest. Parentification describes a role reversal in which the child is expected to look after the parent.
Something that used to happen a lot was my mom, when I was a child, my mom would adopt my feelings. So if as a 5-6-year-old, for some reason I was sad and I was crying, she was going to be sad and she was going to cry. And I had to take care of her. I've been in romantic relationships where that was also the case, where if I was sad, my partner was going to take it as an excuse to be sadder. And it's just never fun. It's just a bad time. That just forces you to not have feelings.
Like all of these corruptions of the parental role, infantilization stems from a refusal to acknowledge the child as a fully separate person. Infantilization is an assault from multiple directions. It manifests in a variety of ways, each one intended to erode some aspect of the individual that confers mature status. One example is a refusal to acknowledge age-appropriate boundaries. Despite 8-year-old Dominic's repeated suggestions that he's old enough to bathe himself,
Yes.
his father continues to bathe him. Finally, Dominic takes the initiative and bathes himself. Finding the bathroom door locked, his father is furious and says if Dominic doesn't need his help bathing, he won't get any more help with anything.
You should not look at boundaries as a reason to punish someone. That's wild. That's gross. That's a red flag. That's anything you want to call it. If somebody's boundaries make you feel like you need to punish them, you're weird, dude. That goes for your 8-year-old wanting to bathe themselves.
Dominic is subjected to a lengthy silent treatment.
We're back to that.
This real-life example illustrates the no-win scenario that plays out in infantilizing families, ideological groups, and workplaces.
Let's talk about the no-win scenario. And we're just going to use like cleaning as an example. If you're somebody who lives with their parents and let's say your mom always cleans your room when you've asked her not to, when you ask her not to, she does it anyway. So let's say one day you just clean it yourself. It's like 100% spotless. And they're like, oh, okay, well, if they don't need my help, then I won't help them with anything. So she stops cleaning, cooking, whatever. That's fine. You can handle that yourself. But then she ignores you. She punishes you. She stops talking to you. That's a problem. I don't understand wanting to punish other people, period, let alone for just being people. This in general makes people feel small. Somebody in the comment section, and if you're watching this, hello, somebody in the comment section mentioned how her spouse does nice things for her, but is it really nice if you don't want someone to do it for you? I would find that annoying.
Targets start from an undermined position. If they ask permission to advance, it's denied. If they dare to take matters into their own hands and demonstrate their competence, they're punished. All roads point back to square one. In healthy families, parents respect and foster their children's emerging desire for independence and privacy. Punishing children for exercising these important boundaries can create lasting conflicted impulses, where privacy and independence become associated with guilt and anxiety. 35-year-old Karen is publicly scolded at a family wedding when her mother discovers a small dove discreetly tattooed on her back. Instead of asking about the deeply personal symbolism and learning something about Karen's life, her mother takes it as evidence of juvenile rebelliousness.
A lot of these parents, a lot of people who infantilize you, want to just start issues, either for attention or because they just want you to feel small. They want to do the whole my roof, or they want to do the whole like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. You'll feel the same way I do when you grow up. If you're looking for excuses like the dove thing here to put someone down instead of getting to know them better, that's just a power play. That's weird. I think it's weird when people need power over other people. Like, I don't even talk to Toast that way, dude.
30-year-old Isolde's father constantly recommends weight loss programs and always prescribes low-calorie food for her when they eat together, in private or public. When she tactfully tries to sidestep his interference, he pushes the point until things get tense. It's as if Karen and Isolde don't own their own bodies. They're just renting them from their parental landlords, who expect their property to be maintained to their specification. Because of their delusion of ownership, they misinterpret their daughter's exercise of bodily autonomy as acts of personal rebellion against them.
You need to understand that people don't do things to you. Maybe if they're punishing you, but that's already a problematic person. But for the most part, everyone's just trying to live their own life. If I want to sit here and play Madden and turn my phone off for the rest of the day, I'm not punishing anyone by not talking to them. I'm sitting here and I'm playing Madden. You check in with your partner and then that's it.
Infantilizing parents break all kinds of boundaries. They decide who their offspring can be friends with.
Mm-hmm.
They turn up at workplaces making scenes.
Oh.
They assume charge of their grandchildren without consultation. Honoring boundaries is one of the most basic expressions of respect we show other people. It demonstrates that we recognize their fundamental governance over their own existence.
This is something I'm trying to figure out now. Not in the way that I respect other people's boundaries. I think I do a good job of that. But sometimes you have friends or people in your life who, when you tell them, hey, I don't like this, hey, not cool, whatever, they go, oh yeah, you're right. But then in practice, they don't respect them. And so that's something I'm trying to figure out. And how far to hold those people from you.
And it's for that reason that crossing boundaries without invitation is reserved for very specific circumstances. For example, when people are incapable of caring for themselves, or where there's a threat of harm. And even in those cases, situations are assessed to make sure that crossing boundaries is genuinely justified.
Yes.
When boundaries are casually ignored, it's an act of disrespect and dominance. The building and maintenance of solid boundaries is one of the most crucial and one of the most difficult aspects of overcoming infantilization. Later on, I'll be looking at what that involves, including some traps to avoid. Dominic's bath time experience illustrates another aspect of infantilization, the persistent withholding of credit. Target's knowledge, experience, and skills are habitually dismissed.
That's a really good point. Like, your child is old enough to bathe themselves. Great. Fantastic. Good job learning. I'm proud of you. Not, nope, I'm going to keep doing it. You can get away with withholding a few things. Like, let's say your kid can ride a bike on their own, right? That doesn't mean you want them riding their bike like 5 miles away from your house. So you can kind of set limits there. But when a child is just developing, why weren't you proud of them? Why aren't you like happy that they're growing into a person? That's not a punishment towards you. That's part of being a parent.
The assumption is they can't do anything. At her 30th birthday party, organized by her aunt, Ingrid says she wants to take a group photo. Her father orders her to give him the camera. She is bound to do it wrong.
Why? Oh.
Later, when she begins to cut her birthday cake, her father snatches the knife and takes over, telling her what a mess she's making. Whatever she tries to do opens some...
How do you make a mess cutting a birthday cake?
Telling her what a mess she's making. Whatever she tries to do opens some champagne, puts some music on, organize games. He swoops in and stops her. Many targets of infantilization are subjected to relentless, debilitating micromanagement. The expected outcome is always failure. And that expectation is used to prevent the target from trying. It's a circular, self-fulfilling prophecy. Preventing targets from trying prevents them from learning,
yes,
which will tend to produce failure, which is then used to justify preventing the target trying.
That goes back to anything, right? That goes back to cleaning, laundry, whatever. Oh, I don't want you to do laundry because you'll do it wrong, but I'm not willing to teach you. So now you have to wait for them to do laundry. And then one day you're going to go to school and you're like, hey, I needed this specific shirt. And you actually did, right? Like you needed that specific shirt for like a Friday thing. We all had stupid things on Fridays at school. And your mom was like, oh, didn't wash it. If you needed it that badly, you could have washed it yourself. But you don't let me. You told me I wash things bad and you won't teach me how to actually do them. And so it's just a big circle of people treating you like a baby. As a kid, you don't really think that you're allowed to get mad. Or you don't know how to anyway. If you do, like if you're like, you're a bad parent, they just shut you down immediately. Like that's another part of this.
Ironically, Ingrid is a far more capable and accomplished person than her father. But like many targets, she's had to acquire all her skills and experience elsewhere, away from her abuser. Her capabilities go unrecognized.
We should talk about that as well. If you as parents aren't going to teach your kids the things that they need to learn, they'll probably look for it somewhere else. They'll probably look for anything you won't give them elsewhere, whether that's love, acceptance, validation. I don't know if those are synonyms. And then what happens is those kids get into relationships and marriages, and now they have a mother and father-in-law who do treat them like adults, who are nice to them. And then those get to see the grandparents, and the original parents are like, oh, I can't believe you treat them better than us. They're not your real parents. And it becomes an entire mess. And all you had to do was treat your child like they were growing up.
And on the rare time she demonstrates her proficiency, it's dismissed as a fluke. In the same way, the extensive talents of people in infantilizing religious and political groups go untapped, because their ideology considers them a subordinate class of human being. They're denied leadership roles and positions on judging panels, and confined to menial tasks. It's not an unrelated fact that those groups are often run by incompetent twits. Sometimes the withholding of credit is falsely wrapped up as concern. In his mid-20s, Nikolai flies out to a holiday resort to meet his parents for a vacation. On his first morning, he says he's going for a swim in the sea. His mother descends into histrionics, insisting his father chaperones the strong swimmer in case he drowns.
Even if he does need a chaperone, are there not other people there? Like they're not like lifeguards or people that work there? Like it has to be the dad? Like you have to let go of some sort of control. You just do. That feels like being an adult. An adult is just like, all right, I'm going to let this one go.
Eventually, to placate her, the two men walk down to the beach, where Nikolai has a joyless swim, conscious of his father's resentment and his own. It's a grindingly familiar experience. Nikolai's mother justifies her constant demeaning interventions with an air of maternal martyrdom, claiming, I can't help fussing. I'm a mother. But while she endlessly fusses, she never actually helps. In fact, she's been conspicuously out of sync with Nikolai's needs ever since he was born. As he'll eventually discover, she has a malignant personality disorder and never felt anything approaching maternal love.
And then it gets into the argument of like, oh, I guess we're all just narcissists then. Oh, I wonder why they all end up being called narcissists. They were just narcissists the whole time. It just took forever to figure that out. It happens.
Which is why her so-called assistants only ever created problems, and why whenever real help was needed, she always made excuses and a swift exit. Her bouts of infantilizing fussing were just cartoonish performances of what she thought maternal love looked like. Aside from trying to extract affirmation for herself for being a doting mother, these performances highlight another element of infantilization found in many areas of abuse. Targets are trained to fear the outside world. Members of religious organizations are warned that the world is in the grip of evil supernatural entities.
Mm-hmm.
Political ideologues are taught to view non-members as either malevolent or enablers of malevolence. Citizens are whipped into divisive paranoia by corrupt governments. Instilling fear is designed to draw targets close with the message, I'll keep you safe. to encourage the voluntary surrender of freedoms and discourage targets from exploring a world they might find complex, beautiful, and engaging. As a result, members of religious and political groups cloister themselves in like-minded bubbles, blocking and shunning dissenting opinions. Citizens offer limitless personal data to governments and corporate giants with childlike trust, believing their best interests will be served. And children grow up having never known an unsupervised moment or been allowed to develop age-appropriate self-management skills, including the ability to deal with conflict without appealing to external authorities to intervene and dispense justice. The persistent diminishing nature of infantilization distinguishes it from authentic protectiveness and concern. Healthy parents don't diminish their offspring. Healthy partners don't diminish their mates.
Healthy partners don't diminish their mates. Like you should, again, never punish your partner. Never. Never. There's a time to have a conversation with them. There are times to say, hey, I need space. But you should never look for ways to punish your partner. That's weird. There shouldn't be a power dynamic in your romantic relationship. In your parental one, there just is. There has to be. One person has to be the parent. But it shouldn't be abused. And you shouldn't be abusive. You should be a parent who helps their child grow up. That's your job.
They don't use their loved one's failures to shame them or disqualify them from further attempts. They understand that working through failure is how we develop. Healthy groups don't restrict contact with non-members. They understand that other perspectives, including critical perspectives, can, like failure, be an important source of growth. The abusive nature of infantilizing protectiveness also reveals itself in the actions taken against people who try to opt out of it. Responses of emotional blackmail, smear campaigns, shunning, silencing, even threats of violence make it clear who targets really need to protect themselves from. Another infantilizing tactic that masquerades as something positive is perpetual wallowing in an idealized past. Whenever 36-year-old Ty speaks to his mother, she embarks on the same long-winded script. In a bedtime story voice, she rehashes Vaseline-lensed memories she's recounted hundreds of times about his early childhood. The stories are littered with the same one-liners.
It's always something like, remember when you were 5 and we were best friends? What happened to us? You just wanted to grow up so badly that you ended up hating me. And all I did was raise you right. All I did was be a good mother.
Why did you have to grow up?
Yep.
You'll always be my little baby. Ty recalls none of these old memories, and hearing them endlessly repeated leaves him feeling disconnected and claustrophobic. It's as if his life stopped when he was 3 years old, at the start of what his mother calls his difficult years, i.e., when he began developing an independent personality. They were certainly difficult for Ty, whose growing independence was met with rages, silent treatments, and exclusion, including being banished from the house for hours.
I already know I'm going to get a few comments that are like, well, when my child was 6, 7, they would give me the silent treatment. You have to understand there's a power dynamic here. When the child does that, they're acting like a child. What are you going to blame them for? Being a child? As an adult, there's a difference between constructively disciplining a child and just straight punishing them. Giving them the silent treatment, punishment. Hitting them, punishment / abuse. Also / abuse. Your job is to help your child become a healthy adult. And if the things that you do or the ways that you discipline your child do not directly help that, you're doing something wrong. If the way you discipline your child tells your child that anytime they do something wrong or inconvenient, they're going to be ignored by the people that are supposed to love them, that's wrong. If your child, if your 7-year-old, if your 10-year-old, if your 12-year-old is giving you the silent treatment, they're a kid. They're a kid, dude. What are you going to do? They're not your parent. We talked about that earlier. Their job is not to raise you.
Including being banished from the house for hours and left to roam the streets.
That's wild.
Decades later, still unwilling to acknowledge her son as an independent person, she continues to try and drag him back to those first 3 years when she felt like the center of his universe. Many abusers repeatedly hark back to a few scant good times to try and block out the years of abuse that truly characterized the relationship and immerse the target in a haze of artificial wistfulness. A sober assessment of just how few good times there actually were will give a fair indication of just how few good times there are to come.
This entire presentation is really for the children. Most of these parents, I'll say most, there are plenty of parents who are smart enough to pick up on it and hopefully have enough self-awareness to be like, oh, did I do that? Oh, that's not good. But this presentation is mostly for the children to go, hey, unfortunately, it's probably not going to get any better. This is the situation you went through, and this is how it unfolds for most other people. Sorry.
With infantilization, memories of helplessness and vulnerability are specifically selected to put the target back in that psychological state. Another common strand of infantilization is that the target's sexuality is denied or obstructed. When Leo and his partner are invited to spend a weekend at his parents' house, his father tells him they'll have to sleep separately.
Well, you guys are roommates. Why would you want to sleep in the same bed? You're just roommates, right? No, you're not really gay. You're doing that for attention. All right, breakdancing dad.
No other couples get treated this way. Sleeping arrangements during family visits are a battleground for many folks. Adults are treated like unruly adolescents and barred from sleeping with their own partners. Controlling religious and pseudoscience groups often try to impede or eliminate sexuality among their members. Masturbation is frequently forbidden. Leaders of groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons have presumed to dictate to married couples what kinds of sex they can and can't have. These invasions are designed to teach targets that even in the most private aspects of their relationships and their bodies, they remain under royal rulership. In working with clients like Leo, who've experienced parental intrusion on their sexuality, I've presented the following hypothetical. Imagine that whenever you visit your parents, before you're allowed to enter, you and your partner have to consent to them slapping you both round the face.
I thought what he was going to ask was, imagine before entering, you and your partner have to come in separately. Like, no, you come in 5 minutes, we'll let that one in too. That would have pissed me off.
How likely would you be to visit them? Invariably, the answer is not very likely. The next question is, how does that differ from what your parents are already doing? Parents who insist on separate beds for their offspring and partners are telling them that their relationship is invalid, that there's something unacceptable about it that disqualifies it from respect. When offspring submit to these intrusions, they're tacitly validating their own invalidation. They're allowing themselves and their partners to be slapped around the face.
I've said this in so many videos. It is not my job to judge or police your relationship with your parents. At all. 0%. I don't care what their religious beliefs are. I don't care what their political beliefs are. Your relationship with your parents is your business. However, whoever you bring into that house has to be protected by you. I don't care if it's a friend or a partner. If you're going to bring your partner into a home where your relationship is invalidated, you're just enabling the hurt. You just are. You are an adult and you need to set that boundary with your parents. I don't care how hard that one is. You don't bring anyone in that house if you can't protect them.
It'll always be up to offspring and their partners to decide what intrusions they're prepared to tolerate from their parents and partners' parents. Just as employees have to decide what intrusions they tolerate from their employers, citizens from their governments, religious followers from their religious leaders. But the consequences of giving in to invalidating power plays are not to be underestimated. When we act like submissive children, our emotions and thoughts follow. We feel and think like submissive children. We regress to a meek, one-down, permission-seeking position, hoping for respect rather than expecting it. As we become smaller, we become more vulnerable to further encroachment. Likewise, when we respond as adults, we feel and think like adults. We operate from an equal position, and we're clear about the respect we're entitled to from loved ones.
If the people in your family are not respecting you and are not treating you like an adult, and you want them in your life, you have to ask for it. If it's one of those things that like, hey, if they're not going to treat me this way, then I'm not going to be around. Okay, cool. But if you're like, I'm going to be around anyway, I would like them to treat me like an adult, you have to ask for it. You just do. You shouldn't have to. You should not. Your parents should be like, oh, adult. I'll treat them like one. If this is the situation you're in, you have to not just set the boundaries, but you have to maintain them. And maybe they won't learn. And what can happen is also, hey, either treat me like an adult or I'm not coming. Then they don't treat you like an adult, so you don't come. And then they go, wow, you're ruining the entire holiday, whatever. But those people are never going to respect you, and you have to get out of there.
Prior to his visit, Leo gave his father some chances to reconsider his position. 3 times he stated he and his partner would expect to sleep together. After his father's 3rd rejection of the idea, Leo informed him they wouldn't be visiting. When Leo's resolve became clear, his father had a rethink and accepted his terms. Leo avoided some common traps targets fall into when they're building boundaries with infantilizing people. One trap is to try and argue their case with the infantilizing individual, or explain why they deserve respect. It's not up to targets to come up with reasons why they should be treated with basic consideration. A variation of this trap is bargaining for respect.
This turns into you should not have to beg for basic rights. You should not have to beg for basic human decency. You should not have to beg to be treated with the respect of being a person. You might have to ask for it, but you should only have to do it once. If you have to ask someone to treat you like a person, the power dynamic there is just them allowing themselves not to treat you like that.
Some targets try offering some concession or compromise to gain basic consideration.
You can't do that. You have to ask for what you want, and then you have to set that boundary. Otherwise, you're just going to get a little bit of what you want, and then less and less and less until you're back to where you were. People enjoy entropy. They enjoy not having to work and not having to consider the way other people feel.
But that just keeps them in a one-down position, giving respect freely, but paying for the respect they receive. Another trap is bluffing. When targets lay out what will happen if they're mistreated, they need to be prepared to follow through with those consequences. To be taken seriously, targets need to be serious.
If you can't respect your own boundaries, no one else is going to. You just have to. You have to.
A final trap worth mentioning is losing control. Frustrating as it is to be infantilized, lashing out just lives down to expectations and feeds into the childlike image that's already being peddled. Anger is an extremely useful emotional fuel when it's harnessed and focused, and for many targets, it plays a huge part in ending their abuse. It can galvanize us, sustain our determination. There's even evidence it can sharpen our information processing skills. In their 2007 paper, Thinking Straight While Seeing Red, Wesley Moons and Diane Mackey found that angry individuals were more likely to discriminate between weak and strong arguments than individuals in neutral moods, and that anger encouraged analytical processing, even in individuals who didn't have strong analytical predispositions. But when anger runs wild, its constructive potential collapses into destructive potential, which can backfire on the target. All these traps spring from the same basic mistake. Targets are overvaluing their abuser's respect. By chasing their respect, they give their abusers a hold over them. When targets turn their focus inwards, on their own self-respect, there's often a natural shift. They stop behaving like second-class citizens and start occupying their full adult space. In milder cases, where there's no deep pathology, a bit of sustained adult resistance can sometimes shake infantilizing individuals out of their misguided behavior, although it's worth preparing for some subsequent backsliding and doubling down in some cases. But at the malignant end, where individuals and groups are entrenched in deeply disordered power fantasies, it's time to think about creating serious personal distance, reducing or terminating contact.
It's hard, and most of the time it's a last resort, but you deserve to be respected and treated like a person. I'm going to assume you're an adult and that you know what's best for yourself. Sometimes that is allowing yourself to make mistakes. That's just part of being a person. That's part of existing. That's part of life. You deserve people in your life who are going to treat you with the respect of just being a person. That includes your parents, and you are under no obligation to just put up with them. You're allowed to set these boundaries. You have to maintain them. And good parents will go, oh, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't come over and clean while you're at work. You can handle that yourself. You're not a child. Whatever it is, you should be allowed to sleep in the same bed as your partner. And if at the end of it all, they refuse to treat you like any sort of person, yeah, get out of there. Get out of there. That's probably what's best for you.
In many religions, certainly the Abrahamic ones, infantilization is intrinsically woven into the central divine concept. The God character, described in scriptural creation myths, designs an immeasurably inferior species called human beings who are prevented from ever attaining that God's knowledge, skills, or understanding. Humans are kept in deliberate ignorance and obliged to obey without comprehension. The biblical creation myth frames this diminished infantilized state as perfection, purity, innocence. This innocent state is venerated as the pinnacle of human existence. That innocence is then despicably abused. In the creation myth, the God character makes a garden paradise called Eden and creates the first man, Adam, to look after it. He then creates the first woman, Eve, to be Adam's helper. The pair of them are left to wander around the garden, where they're allowed to eat the fruit of any tree, with a bizarre exception. The God character chooses the Garden of Eden as the location for two magic trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He directs Adam and Eve not to eat from the second of these, warning them they'll die when they do. But everything's okay. He created them innocent, i.e., ignorant, inexperienced, and obedient. What could go wrong? Well, just about everything. A talking serpent, described variously as subtle, crafty, and cunning, tells the innocent Eve she won't die if she eats the fruit. Instead, she'll become wise like the God character. She eats and persuades Adam to eat, and true to the serpent's word, they don't die, and they gain wisdom. As a sign of their lost innocence, they dress themselves in leaves. The God character then punishes them for disobedience, casting them from Eden, before they can eat the fruit of the other magic tree, the tree of life, which would give them immortality. This creation myth illustrates why innocence is not something to be venerated. Adam and Eve were presented with conflicting statements, which they weren't equipped to process. When the serpent said they wouldn't die, he meant the mere act of eating the fruit wouldn't instantly kill them. When the God character said they'd die when they ate from the tree, he meant he would personally enforce their eventual death. In fact, it was his deliberately misleading phrasing that caused the whole problem. We can safely call it deliberately misleading, because being an all-knowing deity, he would have known how Adam and Eve would misinterpret it. He would have known that if he'd simply told them he would cast them out and let them die, the serpent's statement wouldn't have conflicted with his. And of course, he knew they had no capacity to process the conflicting information they were given. They were punished for failing a test they were designed to fail. The failure lies completely with the God character. If he wanted to preserve human innocence, it was his job to create an environment where it would never be jeopardized. In biblical mythology, the omnipotent, omniscient God character was perfectly capable of creating that environment if it really wanted to. Having just created an entire universe, he could have placed his magic trees out of reach on some distant planet. In fact, there's no explanation for why they even had to exist. He could have made humans unable to communicate with anyone but him, If he wanted to preserve their ignorance, he could have created them without curiosity. For an all-knowing, all-powerful deity, there'd be many simple and obvious measures to avoid jeopardizing human innocence. The fact none of those measures were employed indicates stupidity, incompetence, negligence, or active sadism. Unlike the mythical God of the Bible, humans don't have the magical power to engineer environments where innocence can be sustained. And yet, many still venerate innocence, still work to preserve it in their children, and still punish them for worldly knowledge. The disastrous result is that countless children who are kept in a state of ignorance and inexperience are left wide open to exploitation. A prime example being children who are given no knowledge of sex or sexuality and become easy prey for molesters. This combination of denying sexuality and venerating innocence is particularly poisonous.
Children are naturally curious. That's part of being a person. You want to know why things are, how things work. And in growing up, that means you want to know how to do your laundry, how to cook, how to make friends, how to start relationships. And again, the parent, the deity in this situation is there to be like, let me help. Let me make sure that you do this right. Not, nope, you're not ready. Don't do that. Don't do what you're naturally meant to. When you don't teach children what their parts are, who is allowed to touch them, and then they become touched, the children don't always know that it's a bad thing. However, they do very commonly know that they don't feel good about it. And they don't know how to explain what happened. You want to pray, you want to hope that nobody gets touched in that way when they're a child. Unfortunately, it does happen. And you have to be able to raise your children in a way that if it does happen to them, they can go, this happened and by whom?
This combination of denying sexuality and venerating innocence is particularly poisonous. One of 14-year-old Jasmine's friends brings in one of her mother's old copies of Playgirl. They giggle at the pictures of the men. Jasmine's friend tears off a page for her to keep. She hides it under her bed. Coming back from school one day, she finds the picture gone. Later, her mother comes in, brandishing the picture. She cuts it in two, tears up the body, and saves the head. She threatens to show it to Jasmine's father, let him know what a depraved little girl she is. She continues to dangle that threat over her daughter, keeping Jasmine suspended in a limbo of shame, fear, and anxiety. The blackmail only stops when her mother inadvertently reveals where she keeps the photo, and Jasmine musters the courage to destroy it. Many years later, having grappled with severe trust and shame issues, Jasmine reminded her mother about that period of blackmail in her teens. Her mother said she just couldn't stand the fact her baby was growing up. She wanted Jasmine to stay her sweet little girl forever.
Not wanting your kids to grow up, it's not a reason to stunt their growth. You have to know that you signed up for that when you decided to raise a child or accidentally became a parent.
Another big motif infantilizing families and religions share is the practice of trying to instill a permanent sense of debt. Some parents try to extract gratitude with the line, "I gave you life," as if they did you some favor.
You fed it, you clothed it, you gave it life. Maybe you didn't buy it that chocolate bar the one time.
They didn't.
Nope.
Before you were conceived, you weren't some potential person waiting in the wings, hoping for life. There was no...
Also, listen, all right? Eye contact for this one. I hate the argument against abortion where people were like, well, what if you were aborted? Yeah, what if, dude? Can we do it now?
You, potential person waiting in the wings, hoping for life. There was no you. Your birth wasn't a gift to you. It was your parents' gift to themselves. They gave themselves a child. To demand gratitude for a gift you give yourself is absurd. Infantilizing religions teach followers to prostrate themselves in gratitude to their gods for giving them life. But again, if any of those gods existed, there'd be nothing to thank them for. In Abrahamic mythology, the god character doesn't give the human race life. He gives himself a human race to rule over. He gives himself an empire. An act of birth or creation is nothing to be grateful for. It's a completely self-serving act on the part of the parent. It's what parents do for their children once they're born that counts. And even then, many of the things often characterized as gifts to the child are actually parental duties. It's no gift to children to feed them, clothe them, shelter them, protect them, nurture them. Those are just the basic responsibilities the parents took on when they decided to have children. And even these bare essentials aren't fulfilled by any God characters, who are conspicuous in their absence. Gifts, by definition, are given freely. Trying to instill a sense of permanent debt proves there are no parental gifts being bestowed here. It also indicates a very manipulative mindset. In healthy relationships, people don't try to trap each other.
I only give people things I know they don't want, but that I do. So like if I give you Pokemon cards, but I know that you don't want Pokemon cards, I guess I'll keep them in my binder.
With guilt, obligation, or debt, they stick around because they like each other. I'll end with one more feature, the use of belittling language. Targets are often addressed with juvenile pet names or terms that insinuate immaturity, like young man or young woman. As with other aspects of infantilization, behavior determines context. When the actions are friendly and respectful, there's no sting. When the actions are patronizing and diminishing, the words become charged. In religious groups, infantilizing language is sometimes formally built into job titles. Congregations like the Christian one I was forced into as a child are taught to address priests as father, an explicitly infantilizing term. The perversity of this parent-child dynamic is highlighted when elderly parishioners call young priests father. I personally avoided using this title. I called our priests the vicar. The title, father, seemed creepy for reasons I couldn't pinpoint at the time. I can pinpoint them now. I was being direct.
I think it's really funny when people on TikTok call their priest daddy instead of fathers.
Pinpoint at the time. I can pinpoint them now. I was being directed to relate to these total strangers like I was their son, bypassing the establishment of any personal relationships or the building of any trust. Just like it was with the Heavenly Father, those things were expected to magically snap into existence from nothing. They didn't. We mess around with some very important survival instincts when we try to shortcut children's natural caution around strangers. Some religious scripture descends into animalistic imagery, comparing followers to flocks of sheep presided over by shepherds. As a child, I remember recoiling from this insulting image. But in retrospect, it was a lot more apt than parent-child language. Shepherds don't look after sheep out of kindness or love. They look after sheep so long as they're useful. In the sheep's case, useful for wool, meat, and profit. The truth of this metaphor has been experienced by millions of people reared in religious communities who learned their value was conditional on their utility, and who discovered that those surrogate families who lovingly protected them from knowledge and experience were happy to cut them dead in a heartbeat when their usefulness expired. Infantilization often comes disguised as love, affection, playfulness, protection. But when those things are genuine, they don't leave us feeling suffocated, debilitated, paralyzed. They don't leave us dependent, anxious, and neurotic. If we're feeling any of those things, it's time for a reality check. We don't get to choose the company we're born into, but we do get to choose the company we keep. In most of the real-life cases recounted here, the infantilized offspring eventually claimed their freedom, implementing no contact or minimal contact with rigorous boundaries. A couple of individuals did struggle to translate their awareness into action, and continued to allow draining levels of contact with their abusive parents. Infantilized targets often put up with excessive demands for contact from their abusers, exhausting daily phone calls, and overextended visits. They've been trained to give abusers as much of their personal time as the abusers want, whenever they want it. Limiting contact often facilitates lots of other positive changes. With strong time boundaries in place, abusers have fewer chances to violate other boundaries because the target isn't there. Time apart can help to shed old infantilized habits and strengthen new adult ones. Many targets wrestle with the question of how much contact is reasonable. Is a 5-minute phone call too short? Is 15 minutes more reasonable? This kind of overthinking by targets reflects their anticipation of being judged. To get out of that frame of mind, it's useful for targets to get into the habit of imagining how they'd answer if they were guaranteed no judgment. So, if you knew you weren't going to be judged for it, how much contact would you have with this person?
I think the hard part about that is a lot of these people are judging themselves, right? Like I would feel bad, or I feel bad not talking to my mom. She doesn't have anyone else. I feel bad not talking to my dad. He's just been alone and drinking since the divorce. And so when the first person judging you is yourself, it's a little hard to be like, well, if nobody else judged me, would I judge myself?
Framing questions in this way reveals our real feelings. Being on guard against the manipulative tactic of infantilization doesn't mean we have to put away all childish things. We are the sum of all our experiences in our childhood, adolescence, and our adulthood. There's nothing unhealthy about fondly revisiting the games, books, TV, and films we enjoyed in our childhood. The music for this video is a choral version of a piece I've loved ever since I heard it on a tinny old cassette player when I was 5. Camille Saint-Saëns' The Cuckoo in the Depths of the Woods. Growing up isn't about giving up our past, but expanding on it, being stretched and enriched by experience. There's nothing remotely unhealthy about enjoying childlike affection and playfulness in our adult relationships. The problem arises when the relationship operates coercively on that childlike level. Becoming aware of the subtle, slippery elements of that coercion and recognizing the difference between care and confinement are the first steps in breaking free from the cage of infantilization.